I always knew I would have to fight for my future. I didn't come from a wealthy family or have connections that could open doors for me. All I had was my determination, my intelligence, and my dream to study abroad. I started saving money when I was 14. Every dollar I earned from part-time jobs, every birthday or Christmas gift, I put everything into one fund. Since I was still a minor, I opened a joint bank account with my father. It seemed like a logical choice at the time. Who else could be more trustworthy than my own dad? But life taught me a harsh lesson. Trusting even those closest to you can be dangerous. My father, Jeff, used to be a good man. My mom and I loved him until we discovered he had another life, another woman. Her name was Bella. She was almost 20 years younger than him, always perfectly styled, always flaunting designer handbags in every selfie she posted. She carefully curated her perfect life for the world to see while our family was falling apart. I was 16 when he left. He and Bella moved into a luxurious penthouse while my mom was left struggling to pay the mortgage on our small house. Dad quickly built a new family, while I became something like an afterthought. I never deluded myself into thinking Bella would ever be a stepmother to me. She didn't care about me at all. In fact, I think my existence annoyed her. We barely spoke, only when it was absolutely necessary. No one ever asked how I felt about their marriage, about my father's betrayal, about how my world had been turned upside down. I didn't throw tantrums. I just distanced myself. My goal was simple: save enough money and get out. By the time I turned 22, I had finally saved enough. It had taken years of strict budgeting, working every weekend and holiday, skipping out on social events. But every sacrifice had been worth it. I had been accepted into my dream university, and all that was left was to pay the tuition. I opened my banking app, entered my password, and froze. The balance was almost zero. At first, I thought it was a glitch. I refreshed the app. Nothing changed. The money, years of savings, was gone. I quickly checked my transaction history. The funds had been withdrawn in several large sums. From my account. The account that had a co-owner. My father. My hands were shaking as I dialed his number. He picked up almost immediately. "Hey, Emma, what's wrong? Where's my money?" Silence. A few seconds stretched into eternity. "Emma, listen, it's not what you think. Not what I think." I could hear my own voice rising, the panic and rage building inside me. "You took all my money." There was an urgent situation. An urgent situation? My breath caught in my throat. "You stole my tuition money." He exhaled heavily. "Bella had debts. She got into some trouble." "You gave my money to Bella?" I expected him to deny it, to at least try to come up with some kind of excuse. But he didn't. "I didn't have a choice," he finally said. I laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. "You didn't have a choice? You took the money I spent 8 years saving and just handed it to your wife. I was going to pay you back." "When? In 10 years? 20? Silence. "You knew this money was for my education," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I understand if you can't forgive me right now." I hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, my mind completely blank. A few minutes later, a message popped up. "Emma, you know how much I love you. Just give me some time. We'll figure this out." I didn't reply. I didn't know what to do. But one thing was certain: this wasn't just betrayal. This was the end of trust. When I received my acceptance letter to my dream university, I felt like my years of hard work had finally paid off. I had spent 8 years saving every dollar I could, working part-time jobs, skipping vacations, and sacrificing nights out with friends. I had given up so much, but it was all worth it. I had been accepted into one of the most prestigious universities, and now all I had to do was transfer the tuition payment. But when I logged into my banking app, ready to make the payment, my heart nearly stopped. My balance was almost empty. $50,000 gone. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of banking error. Maybe the app was glitching. I refreshed the page. Still nothing. My mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And then, the realization hit me like a freight train. The joint account. The only other person who had access to it. My father. I frantically scrolled through the transaction history, my fingers trembling. Large withdrawals had been made in the past few weeks. Thousands at a time. I wasn't even getting alerts about these transactions. He must have disabled notifications on my end. I felt sick. Without wasting another second, I called him. He answered almost immediately. "Emma." "Hey, sweetheart, how are you?" He sounded so casual, so normal, like nothing was wrong. "Where's my money?" My voice was cold, sharp. There was a pause. Then, a heavy sigh. "Emma, listen, I was going to tell you." "Tell me what?" "That you stole $50,000 from me." My voice was rising, but I didn't care. "That you emptied my entire savings without even telling me?" There was another pause. Then his voice came back calm. Too calm. "I didn't steal it. It's still family money." I felt a wave of white-hot rage course through me. "Family money?" My voice shook. "That was my money. I worked for it. I saved it. That was for my education." He sighed again, as if I was being unreasonable. "Look, it's not like I wasted it. It's an investment. Bella needed funding for her business, and I nearly dropped my phone." "Her business?" "She's opening a boutique," he said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. It's going to be a really great opportunity for her, Emma. She's always had a passion for fashion, and this store is going to give her a real chance to. I couldn't breathe. You stole my tuition money to open a clothing store for Bella? You have to understand, sweetheart, these things require capital. She needed a solid start, and I knew you'd want to support her. I felt like I was going to explode. Support her? Why the hell would I ever support her? Emma, lower your voice, he said, suddenly sounding irritated. It's done. There's no point in getting worked up about it. We're family, and families help each other. I was shaking with rage. I heard a voice in the background. A woman's voice. Bella. Is that Emma? She asked, her tone dripping with amusement. Oh, let me talk to her. Before I could say anything, there was some shuffling on the other end, and then Bella's voice came through the phone, clear and cheerful. Hey there, kiddo, she chirped. I clenched my jaw. I just wanted to say thank you for your generous contribution, she continued, a fake sweetness in her tone. It really means a lot that you're supporting my dream. I felt something inside me snap. You stole my money, I spat. Oh, come on, she laughed. It's family money, Emma. And besides, don't be so dramatic. You can always make more. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. You think this is funny? I said through gritted teeth. Well, she said, I think it's a little dramatic to act like your life is over just because of some missing cash. Jeff and I are building something amazing here, and once the boutique takes off, I'm sure we can help you out with. I hung up before she could finish. I stared at the screen, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My head was spinning. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. A minute later, a message popped up on my phone. It was from my dad. Emma, I understand you're upset, but please try to see the bigger picture. Bella's boutique is a real business, and it's going to be successful. Once it starts making a profit, we'll work something out for you, okay? We're all family, and we need to support each other. Love you. I let out a strangled laugh. Support each other? I spent 8 years saving that money. I had sacrificed my teenage years for it, and he had taken it in a matter of weeks to fund her shopping fantasy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. And most of all, I wanted revenge. Revenge wasn't my first thought. At first, all I wanted was my money back. I called banks, legal aid offices, and even tried to get a lawyer to take my case. But I hit a wall at every turn because, since my father had been a co-owner on the account, the withdrawals weren't technically considered theft. He had every legal right to take my money, no matter how immoral it was, and the realization made me feel sick to my stomach. $50,000, the result of 8 years of hard work, sleepless nights, and constant sacrifice, was gone in a matter of weeks, and the worst part was that the people responsible for it didn't even feel guilty. Bella, of course, acted like it was nothing. She flaunted her new boutique all over social media, posting glossy photos of herself posing in front of racks of overpriced dresses, inviting influencers to the exclusive launch party, and in a post that made my blood boil, publicly thanking my father for believing in her dreams and making this all possible. The comments were flooded with heart emojis and people gushing over her so-called business success, and I realized something that sent a surge of rage through my entire body. She wasn't just spending my money, she was taking credit for it. She was building an empire on the foundation of my stolen future, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't getting my money back, but I was going to make sure Bella and my father lost everything. I didn't know how I was going to do it yet, but I was going to destroy them. At first, I had no idea where to start, but then I remembered something important. Bella loved attention, which meant she also loved oversharing. I spent hours combing through every social media post she had ever made, analyzing every caption, every tag, and every location check-in, searching for anything that seemed off. I saved screenshots of everything that stood out, including her exaggerated claims about having exclusive designer connections, the inconsistent pricing of her so-called original pieces, and most importantly, a bragging post where she claimed she had gotten the store location at an unbeatable price thanks to her amazing networking skills. That last part stuck with me because, as far as I knew, getting prime retail space in a high-end district wasn't something that just happened because you knew the right people, and the way she worded it made it seem like there was more to the story. I started making calls. I reached out to small designers, boutique owners, and even local event planners, pretending to be an aspiring business owner who was curious about Bella's boutique and its rapid success. Most people ignored me, but then I got lucky when a designer named Natalie Cho responded. When I sent her a link to Bella's website, she immediately called me, furious, because one of the dresses Bella was selling under her brand was almost identical to a piece Natalie had designed months earlier. The only difference was that Bella had slightly altered the neckline and added a different pattern, but the overall silhouette and cut were unmistakable. Natalie was so angry that she started ranting about how Bella had stolen designs before, mentioning that other designers in her circle had complained about their work mysteriously appearing in Bella's collections, slightly modified just enough to avoid legal trouble. I asked her if she had proof, and within minutes, she flooded my inbox with side-by-side comparisons, receipts of her original sketches, and even a few angry emails she had sent Bella that had gone unanswered. This was the first real evidence I needed. Bella wasn't just a fraud, she was a thief. But that wasn't the only thing I found. I also managed to track down a real estate agent named Ethan who had been involved with the property before Bella took over, and when I mentioned her boutique, he immediately told me that something about the deal hadn't seemed right. According to him, the permits for the store had been pushed through suspiciously fast, skipping several necessary inspections, and there were whispers that she had used a fake business license to secure the lease. I asked him if there was any way to confirm this, and while he couldn't provide official documents, he told me that if someone were to report it to the right authorities, there was a very good chance an investigation would be opened. That was all I needed to hear. Bella had built her entire business on stolen designs and illegal permits, and now I had the ammunition to bring her down. I called my two best friends, Mia and Jason, and explained everything I had found. Mia was a social media wizard who knew exactly how to make things go viral, while Jason was a tech genius who could dig up anything online. Together, we came up with a three-phase plan. The first phase was to destroy Bella's online reputation. Mia and I created dozens of fake accounts and flooded her boutique's pages with negative reviews. We claimed the clothes were low quality, that they fell apart after a single wash, that the customer service was horrible, and that people were being scammed by outrageous markups. Within days, her boutique's rating dropped from 4.8 stars to 1.2, and angry comments started appearing under every one of her Instagram posts, calling her a fraud, a scammer, and a thief. The second phase was to expose the truth. Jason gathered all the evidence we had collected, the stolen designs, the fake business license rumors, and the illegally obtained permits, and compiled them into a massive file. We then sent everything to local fashion blogs, influencers, and even news stations, hoping someone would pick up the story. It didn't take long. Within a week, a well-known journalist, Olivia Marks, published an article titled "The Fraud Behind Bella's Boutique, Stolen Designs, Fake Permits, and the Scam of the Year," and it went viral. People started demanding refunds. Independent designers came forward with their own accusations. Fashion YouTubers made videos calling Bella out, ripping apart her business practices, and exposing her lies to millions of viewers. And Bella? She panicked. She tried to play the victim, claiming she was being unfairly attacked, but it was too late. The damage was done, and her reputation was in shambles. The third and final phase was the legal strike. With Ethan's help, I submitted an anonymous tip to the city's business regulatory office, providing them with everything we had uncovered about Bella's illegal permits. Within days, an official investigation was launched, and when inspectors showed up at her boutique, they found multiple violations that forced them to shut it down indefinitely. On top of that, lawsuits from designers started piling up, and fines for illegal business operations began draining her accounts faster than she could keep up. And my father? At first, he tried to defend her, claiming that Bella's business was being unfairly targeted, but once the lawsuits and financial troubles started crippling them, I think it finally hit him just how badly he had screwed up. One night, I got a text from him saying, "Emma, we need to talk." I ignored it. Then another. "I know you had something to do with this. Bella is devastated. Please, can we just talk?" I didn't reply. I sat back, watching as everything they had stolen from me burned to the ground, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The grand opening of Bella's boutique was supposed to be a glamorous affair, an event where she could bask in the admiration of her followers and pretend to be a self-made businesswoman, and for weeks, she had been hyping it up on social media, posting countdowns, sharing carefully edited behind-the-scenes glimpses of the boutique's interior, and boasting about the exclusive designs that would be available only to those lucky enough to attend, while the guest list was packed with local influencers, minor celebrities, and fashion bloggers who had been promised VIP treatment, lavish gift bags, and an opportunity to be part of what Bella called the most exclusive fashion launch of the year. She had spared no expense in making sure it was a spectacle, but what she didn't know was that I had been planning something even bigger, something that would make sure her perfect night ended in complete and utter disaster. And as she stood at the entrance of her boutique, smiling for the cameras and welcoming her guests with an air of smug self-importance, she had no idea that her world was about to come crashing down in front of everyone. The first sign that something was wrong came when a hush spread through the crowd as a group of uniformed inspectors from the city's business regulation department entered the boutique, their presence in immediate contrast to the glamorous atmosphere that Bella had tried so hard to create, and as guests turned in confusion, whispering among themselves, and journalists who had been invited to cover the event instinctively raised their cameras. Sensing a scandal, Bella's confident smile faltered slightly as she watched the men in suits move purposefully toward the center of the boutique, stopping just in front of the main display where her so-called exclusive designs were carefully arranged for maximum aesthetic appeal. She let out a small, nervous laugh and adjusted the designer dress she had undoubtedly bought with my stolen money, before stepping forward and tilting her head in a way that was clearly meant to convey effortless confidence, but the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her uncertainty as she spoke. "Excuse me," she said, forcing a smile. "Can I help you with something? I'm actually in the middle of a very important event, so if this isn't urgent." But before she could finish, one of the inspectors, an older man with a clipboard and an air of quiet authority, cut her off without even looking at her, his voice carrying through the boutique with an air of finality that made the entire room go silent as he announced, "This business is operating under fraudulent permits, and is hereby ordered to shut down immediately." For a moment, there was nothing but stunned silence as the weight of those words settled over the room, and then, all at once, the boutique erupted into chaos as guests began whispering frantically to one another. Journalists scrambled to capture every second of what was happening. And influencers who had arrived expecting a night of luxury and exclusivity were now pulling out their phones to record Bella's public humiliation in real time. I watched from a distance, unnoticed among the growing crowd of onlookers outside the boutique, as Bella's face drained of color and her carefully constructed persona shattered in an instant, her eyes darting wildly between the inspectors, the cameras, and my father, who stood frozen beside her with a look of complete and utter shock as he finally began to realize just how badly he had miscalculated everything. Bella let out another forced laugh, though this time there was a hint of panic behind it, and she shook her head in what I could only assume was a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation before she turned to the lead inspector, her voice laced with irritation and thinly veiled desperation as she snapped. "There has to be some mistake. I don't know what kind of nonsense you've been told, but my business is completely legitimate. And you're making a very serious error by disrupting my event like this." The inspector barely spared her a glance as he handed her an official notice of closure, his voice calm but firm as he replied, "You can file a formal appeal if you believe there has been an error, but as of this moment, your business is legally required to cease all operations, effective immediately." And without giving her a chance to argue further, he turned to her employees, instructing them to shut down the registers, lock up the merchandise, and vacate the premises while the boutique was placed under investigation. And just like that, everything Bella had worked to build, or rather, everything she had stolen from me to build, was officially over. The journalists pounced instantly, cameras flashing as they surrounded her with questions that she had no way to answer, their voices overlapping as they threw accusation after accusation in her direction. "Is it true you forged your business documents? Did you really steal designs from independent creators? How do you respond to the fraud allegations? Is it true that your boutique was funded with stolen money?" And with every question, Bella's composure cracked a little more as she stumbled over half-formed sentences, her eyes darting toward my father in silent desperation. But this time, he couldn't save her. The internet was ruthless, and within hours, clips of her public humiliation were circulating on every social media platform imaginable, the hashtags #BellaTheFraud and #ScamQueen trending as people dissected every second of her downfall, with users across the world picking apart her past posts, exposing every lie she had ever told, and flooding the boutique's now-locked social media pages with furious comments demanding refunds, apologies, and justice for the small designers she had exploited. Bella, desperate to salvage what little remained of her reputation, attempted to do damage control by going live on Instagram, her face tear-streaked and her voice shaking as she tearfully insisted that she was the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by jealous competitors who wanted to see her fail. But if she had hoped for sympathy, she was sorely mistaken because, within minutes, the comment section was flooded with people calling her out on every single lie. With her boutique shut down, her investors pulling out, and her name tarnished beyond repair, Bella tried one last, desperate attempt to save herself by moving her business online, launching a rebranded website, and attempting to sell her designs through direct-to-consumer sales. But if she thought she could outrun the scandal, she was completely delusional because the internet never forgets, and within days, her new brand was exposed, blacklisted, and publicly torn apart. Every attempt she made to rebuild was crushed before it even had a chance to begin, and as if that weren't enough, the deeper authorities dug into her finances, the worse things got because it turned out that, in addition to stealing my tuition money, Bella had also taken out massive loans using falsified documents, and the second the banks realized they had been scammed, it became a full-blown legal investigation. My father, who had spent months blindly supporting Bella and throwing away everything for her, suddenly found himself caught in the crossfire, his name forever linked to a woman who had scammed, lied, and stolen her way to the top, only to come crashing down in the most humiliating way possible. I watched everything unfold from a distance, knowing that my revenge was complete, and when my father finally texted me saying, "Emma, we need to talk," I simply stared at the screen, my lips curling into a satisfied smile as I typed out the only response he deserved. "I have no idea what you're talking about." The collapse didn't happen all at once, but when it did, it was relentless, an unstoppable avalanche that crushed everything in its path, and no matter how desperately Bella and Jeff tried to claw their way out, they only sank deeper into the ruins of their own making, buried under the weight of their lies, their greed, and their sheer arrogance in believing they could take from me without consequence. At first, Bella tried to maintain the illusion that everything was fine, posting vague, passive-aggressive messages about fake friends and jealous haters on her social media, but the world wasn't buying it, and soon, the reality of her situation became impossible to ignore as the creditors came knocking, demanding repayment for the massive loans she had fraudulently acquired, and with her assets frozen, her accounts locked, and her so-called fashion empire in shambles, she was left with no choice but to start selling off her own belongings just to survive. The same designer bags she had once flaunted as proof of her success, the same diamond jewelry she had flashed in countless selfies, the same luxurious furniture she had once bragged about in carefully curated Instagram posts were now desperately listed on secondhand marketplaces, their prices slashed in a pathetic attempt to scrape together whatever cash she could, and the humiliation of it all wasn't lost on the public, who took gleeful satisfaction in watching her downfall unfold in real time, filling the comment sections of her old posts with ruthless mockery and well-earned schadenfreude. She tried to keep up appearances, pretending she was simply decluttering or choosing to live a more minimalistic lifestyle, but no one believed her anymore, and the final nail in the coffin came when an anonymous source leaked her financial records, revealing that she wasn't just broke, she was drowning in a sea of fraudulent debts, with no hope of escaping the consequences this time. As bad as things were for her, They were about to get so much worse, because while the boutique scandal had been enough to ruin her reputation, the real devastation came when authorities dug deeper into her financial history and uncovered something far more incriminating: hidden offshore accounts, undeclared income, and a tangled web of money laundering schemes that exposed just how deep her fraud truly ran. Bella had always been reckless, believing she was too clever to ever get caught, but she had underestimated just how much scrutiny would come crashing down on her the moment her house of cards collapsed. And now, every illegal transaction, every falsified document, and every shady deal she had ever made was being dragged into the light for the entire world to see. The government wasted no time in escalating their investigation, freezing all of her assets, leaving her completely powerless to access whatever money she still had hidden, and from that moment on, it was a rapid downward spiral as fines, lawsuits, and criminal charges began piling up faster than she could even comprehend, each one another weight crushing her deeper into the abyss of her own making. Her once loyal supporters, the same people who had gushed over her glamorous lifestyle and praised her as an inspiration, turned on her in an instant, their admiration replaced with disgust as they realized she wasn't just a failed businesswoman, she was a con artist. Even those who had once defended her, claiming the initial scandal had been exaggerated, were now scrambling to distance themselves as her crimes became impossible to deny, and as her world crumbled around her, she did what she always did when things got hard. She ran straight to Jeff, expecting him to fix it. For a while, he tried, but the problem was he was drowning too. At first, my father had deluded himself into thinking he could salvage the situation, convinced that if he just weathered the storm, things would eventually settle down. But the moment Bella's bank accounts were locked and her creditors started coming after their personal assets, the full weight of his catastrophic mistake finally crashed down on him. And he was forced to confront the horrifying truth that he had ruined himself for a woman who had nothing left to offer him. As the debts mounted, as the lawsuits stacked higher and higher, as his name became synonymous with scandal and fraud, he began to desperately search for a way out, and that was when I got the message I had been waiting for. At first, he was cautious, sending me a simple text that read, "Emma, we need to talk." I ignored it, letting him stew in his own misery. But when the next message came, it was clear that the desperation was beginning to set in. Because this time, he didn't just ask for a conversation, he made an offer. "I made a mistake. I see that now. Can we meet? I can get you some of the money back." My hands clenched around my phone as I read the words, my jaw tightening at the sheer audacity of it, as if a partial refund could ever undo what he had done, and as if I would ever let him control the terms of making things right. I let him wait for my response, knowing that every second of silence was another moment of him stewing in his own regret, and when I finally replied, I made sure he understood that this wasn't a negotiation. "How much?" There was a long pause before he finally answered, as if he was dreading my response. "I don't have it all, but I can return at least 20K. We can work something out." I felt a cold, sharp anger settle in my chest as I stared at the message, because after everything, after stealing from me, after betraying me, after throwing away our relationship for a woman who was now dragging him straight to hell with her, he still thought he could get away with paying only part of what he owed. I let him sit with his pathetic offer before finally responding, my message brief, direct, and completely unyielding. "I want all of it. Every dollar. And I want you to admit, publicly, that you stole from me." His response came almost immediately, filled with the kind of pleading and pathetic excuses I had come to expect from him. "Emma, please. I can't do that. My reputation." But the moment I read the words, I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter, because the fact that he still believed he had a reputation to protect after everything was just another example of his endless, self-serving delusions, and so, instead of arguing, instead of explaining why he no longer had the right to beg for dignity, I simply did what I should have done a long time ago. I left him unread. I didn't need to respond, because his complete and utter collapse was already unfolding in real time. The creditors weren't just going after Bella anymore. They were coming after him too, because in his arrogance, he had signed financial documents tying himself to her debts, and now, they weren't just demanding her money, they were demanding his. He tried to sell his house, only to find that with his assets under investigation, he wasn't even allowed to finalize the sale, and when he attempted to negotiate a settlement, the authorities had no interest in cutting him a deal, because his involvement in her fraud made him just as guilty. With nowhere left to turn, with no more allies, no more favors to call in, no more money to shield him from the consequences of his own stupidity, he did the one thing he had never done before: he broke. One evening, my phone rang, and when I answered, his voice was raw, desperate, utterly defeated in a way I had never heard before. "Emma," he said, barely above a whisper, "I don't know what to do." For the first time, he was the one begging. For the first time, he was the one who had lost everything. And I felt nothing. I let the silence stretch between us, savoring the weight of his regret before I finally spoke, my voice calm, controlled, and completely devoid of sympathy. "You owe me $50,000, I said, every word sharp and deliberate. And you're going to admit, in writing and in public, that you stole from me." His breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought he might argue, might try one last desperate plea, but then, finally, he exhaled shakily and whispered, "Okay?" I hung up, knowing that, for the first time in his life, he had no other choice but to do the right thing. Bella's arrogance was boundless, and even after losing everything, her boutique, her money, her reputation, she still convinced herself that she could somehow turn the tide in her favor, believing that if she just pushed back hard enough, She could rewrite history and erase the reality of what she had done, and in a final, desperate attempt to salvage what remained of her shattered image, she did the only thing a fraud with no real defense could do. She sued for defamation. The lawsuit was as ridiculous as it was predictable, a pathetic effort to paint herself as the victim and blame everyone but herself for the destruction of her career, and in the absurd fantasy she constructed, she was not a scammer, not a thief, not a con artist who had been caught red-handed, but rather the innocent entrepreneur whose name had been unfairly dragged through the mud by bitter, jealous enemies who wanted to see her fail. She didn't just go after the journalists who had reported on her fraud, she went after me as well, claiming in her lawsuit that I had orchestrated a targeted campaign of harassment against her, that I had conspired with the media to spread false allegations, and that as a result, she had suffered emotional distress, financial ruin, and irreparable damage to her reputation. She wanted a retraction, she wanted damages, she wanted the courts to undo what had already been done. But most of all, she wanted to believe, even in her downfall, that she still had some control over the narrative, that she could still manipulate the world into believing she was the real victim. But her plan backfired in the most spectacular way possible, because if she thought a lawsuit would help her rebuild what had been destroyed, she was delusional, and the moment she stepped into the courtroom, her final humiliation began. The case was weak from the very start, built entirely on her own fantasies rather than any real legal standing, and the moment the judge began reviewing the evidence, it was obvious to everyone in the room that Bella was not just going to lose, she was going to be completely obliterated. The journalists she had tried to silence came prepared, filing counterclaims against her for frivolous litigation and demanding that she be held accountable for wasting the court's time, and with every shred of evidence that was presented, the truth became impossible to deny. The boutique's fraudulent financial records, the stolen designs, the illegally obtained business permits, all of it was laid bare once again, and with each passing minute, Bella's attempt at a comeback crumbled further until, finally, the judge dismissed the case outright, stating in no uncertain terms that the truth is not defamation. That should have been the end of it, but Bella's downfall was far from over, because as she stormed out of the courtroom, humiliated and defeated, she was met with a fresh wave of media coverage that only made things worse. News outlets reported on her failed lawsuit with headlines that further cemented her disgrace. Social media exploded with memes mocking her pathetic attempt to silence the truth, and even those who had once pitied her found themselves laughing at the sheer desperation of it all, and within hours, her name was trending again, not as a fashion mogul or a businesswoman, but as the woman who tried to sue reality itself and lost. As the world continued tearing her apart, Bella did the only thing she had left. She disappeared. She wiped her social media clean, deleted her accounts, and vanished from public life without a word, and though no one knew exactly where she went, rumors swirled that she had fled the country, hiding out somewhere in Europe, hoping that if she laid low long enough, people would forget, but the truth was that she was never coming back, because there was nothing left to come back to. She had burned every bridge, lost every ounce of credibility, and destroyed any chance of rebuilding herself, and now, she was nothing more than a cautionary tale, a public disgrace, a name people would remember only as a joke. But while Bella faded into obscurity, Jeff's reckoning was just beginning, because unlike her, he couldn't simply run away from the disaster he had helped create, and now that Bella was gone, he had no one left to shield him from the full weight of the consequences, and the reality of what he had done finally became impossible for him to ignore. His name had been dragged through the mud alongside hers, his finances were completely destroyed, and the very people he had once abandoned me for were now doing the same to him, turning their backs the moment he became more of a liability than an asset, and with the creditors demanding repayment, the lawsuits piling up, and the debts threatening to bury him alive, he found himself with no choice but to finally face me. At first, he tried to delay the inevitable, sending me half-hearted messages asking to talk, as if he still thought he could somehow negotiate his way out of this, but I ignored him every time, because after everything he had done, he no longer deserved a conversation. When he realized I wasn't going to respond, he resorted to desperation, sending me a final message that simply read, "I can pay you back some of the money. Can we meet?" And for a moment, I stared at the words, my anger simmering beneath the surface, because even now, he still thought he could get away with paying only part of what he owed, as if $50,000 was just a number he could haggle over instead of the stolen price of my future. I made him wait before responding, knowing that the silence would make him squirm, and when I finally replied, I was direct and unforgiving. "I want all of it. Every dollar. And I want you to admit, publicly, that you stole from me." His response came quickly, filled with the same pathetic excuses I had come to expect, insisting that he had lost everything and that a public admission would ruin him even more, as if he wasn't already ruined. But I wasn't interested in his excuses, and so instead of arguing, instead of giving him any room to negotiate, I simply stopped replying. I knew what would happen next. I knew that he had no way out. And I was right. With no other options, no money left to fall back on, and no one willing to save him, he finally gave in, sending me the last payment in full, $50,000 wired directly into my account, and with it, one last message, a pathetic attempt at closure that read, "I hope one day you can forgive me." I stared at the words for a long time before finally deleting the message without responding, because the truth was, I had already moved on. With the money finally back where it belonged, I wasted no time in leaving everything behind, boarding the plane that would take me to the life I had fought so hard for, and as I looked out the window, watching the city that had once been the center of my world grow smaller and smaller beneath me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. For years, my life had been consumed by betrayal, by stolen dreams and broken trust, by battles I never should have had to fight, but now, finally, I was free. I was free from the people who had dragged me down, free from the weight of the past, free to start over in a place where no one knew my name, where I wasn't Jeff's daughter or the girl Bella scammed, but just Emma, a student, a dreamer, someone with an entire future ahead of her. And as the plane took off, I closed my eyes, letting the hum of the engines drown out the last echoes of everything I had left behind. And when I opened them again, I was ready. This was it, the life I had fought for, the life I had won, the life that was finally, truly mine. Even after everything that had happened, after the betrayal, the lies, and the theft that had shattered what little trust one had left in him, Jeff still convinced himself that there was a way to fix things, as if an apology or a few forced attempts at reconciliation could erase the damage he had done, and despite the fact that he had only paid me back because he had no other choice, he still acted as if it had been some great act of redemption, rather than the bare minimum required for him to finally take responsibility for his actions. At first, his attempts to reach out were subtle, carefully worded messages designed to seem harmless, casual check-ins that made it appear as though he genuinely cared about how I was adjusting to my new life. But when I ignored them, when I refused to play into whatever version of reality he had constructed for himself, the messages became longer, filled with guilt-laden apologies and rambling explanations about how much he regretted everything, how much he wished he could take it all back, and how he just wanted one chance to have an honest conversation so we could start fresh, as if there was anything left to salvage. But the truth was, there was nothing left to say. Because trust, once broken, does not return, and no matter how many times he told me he had changed, no matter how much he insisted that he had learned from his mistakes, I knew that the man who had stolen from me once was capable of doing it again, and the idea of ever allowing him back into my life, even in the smallest of ways, felt like a betrayal of everything I had fought to reclaim. I understood, even if he didn't, that his attempts to reconnect weren't about fixing what was broken, but about his loneliness, his regret, his inability to cope with the fact that he had destroyed everything for a woman who had used him and discarded him the second she could no longer benefit from his devotion, and while he might have thought that our relationship could somehow be mended, I knew without a doubt that it could not. There was no going back to the way things were, no rewriting of history where I simply forgave and forgot, and even if a part of me still felt the ghost of what we once were, the undeniable truth remained that he had made his choices and that he had to live with them just as I had been forced to live with the consequences of his betrayal. And so, just as I had done with every other message, I deleted it without responding, closing the door on him forever. And while I had once felt a deep, aching pain at the loss of my father, I now felt nothing at all. Because whatever relationship we had once shared, whatever love had existed between us, had died the moment he had chosen to put Bella above me. For months, I heard nothing of Bella, no news, no updates, no whispers of what had become of her after her bankruptcy and her failed lawsuit, and for a time, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps she had finally accepted her defeat, that maybe, after all of the destruction she had caused, she had learned that there was no place left for her in the world she had tried to manipulate. But I should have known better, because people like Bella do not disappear, they reinvent, they scheme. They convince themselves that if they just change their name, their branding, their approach, then the past will simply fade away and they can start over as if nothing had ever happened. It started quietly, a small rumor circulating among industry insiders about a mysterious new designer, someone with no past, no professional history, but with an uncanny ability to market their brand in a way that felt strangely familiar. And while some dismissed it as mere coincidence, Mia was the one who connected the dots, sending me a late-night message with nothing more than a link and the words "she's back." And the moment I opened the website, I knew, without a doubt, that it was her. The boutique had a new name, the branding had been slightly altered, but everything else was the same. The same aesthetic, the same marketing tactics, the same false sense of exclusivity designed to convince customers they were part of something elite and unattainable, and most damning of all, the same stolen designs repackaged under a different label. She had changed the surface details, but the foundation of her scam was identical to the one she had built before, and while she had clearly convinced herself that no one would connect her past to her present, she had underestimated just how closely people were still watching, how many were still waiting for her to make a mistake, and within days, her entire charade began to unravel. Screenshots of her new designs were placed side by side with the ones she had stolen before, her fake credentials were exposed, and her new brand, the one she had so desperately hoped would be her ticket back into the industry, became yet another scandal, another embarrassment, another public disgrace that left her scrambling to erase her tracks before the damage became irreversible. But this time, there was no explosive media frenzy, no lawsuits, no dramatic unraveling of her empire, because this time, no one cared. There was no one left to defend her, no one left to give her another chance, no one willing to believe her carefully constructed lies, and before she could even fully launch, she was completely erased from the industry, not with a bang, but with the quiet, suffocating finality of someone who had finally run out of places to hide. And as Bella's second attempt at reinvention collapsed just as quickly as the first, I was finally stepping into the life that had once felt so impossibly out of reach, standing in the lobby of a prestigious firm, waiting for my first day as an intern at the company I had spent years dreaming of working for, knowing that every moment that had led me here, every hardship, every setback, every betrayal had only made this victory even sweeter. For so long, I had been fighting to reclaim what had been taken from me, to prove that I was more than just the girl whose future had been stolen. But now, as I walked through the doors of my new workplace, I no longer felt like someone who had been wronged, who had suffered, who had lost. I felt like someone who had one. At first, there was doubt, a small flicker of insecurity whispering that maybe I didn't belong, that maybe I wasn't good enough. But as I introduced myself to my colleagues, as I shook hands with people who saw me not as a victim but as an equal, as I sat down at my desk and realized that I had earned my place here, I felt something I had not felt in a long time: certainty. I was not the same girl who had once trusted too easily, who had allowed others to dictate her future, who had been naive enough to believe that the people who were supposed to protect her never would betray her, because that girl had been forced to learn, in the hardest possible way, that the only person she could ever truly rely on was herself. And if there was one lesson that I would carry with me for the rest of my life, one truth that had been burned so deeply into my soul that I knew I would never forget it, it was this: I would never again let anyone have control over my finances, my future, or my life, because I had fought too hard to reclaim what was mine to ever let it be taken from me again. As I left the office that day, walking through a city that had once felt foreign but now felt like home, I allowed myself to stop for a moment, to take it all in, to breathe in the reality of the life I had built for myself, and for the first time in years, I felt something I had thought I had lost forever: peace. I was free from the past, free from the shadows of the people who had betrayed me, free to move forward without ever looking back. And as I walked toward my future, unburdened and unafraid, I knew, with absolute certainty, that this time, my life was truly and completely mine.